Hello and welcome to Gangs All Here. My name is Ryan Sampson, the host and producer of the show. That's my guy, Frankie Ryan from U Stadium. We're going to talk about the Jets' top offseason storylines, and we have a lot to discuss here, Frankie. And one of the biggest storylines I think that is emerging between Jets fans on social media and from the media reporters are, what do the Jets do with the quarterback situation? Because Aaron Rodgers, by all intents and purposes, will be cut by this Jets team, and they are officially moving on to the next chapter of this franchise. So they need to solve the quarterback issue, and they have a top 10 draft pick at 7. And by all we have seen and indicated from reports, and the combine starts next week, Frankie, and I think a lot of people are going to be asking themselves, this kid Jaxson Dart, who many consider might be the third best quarterback in this draft, could be special, but there's a lot of question marks surrounding him, and I think a lot of fans are asking themselves, could the Jets draft Jaxson Dart at 7? So I got to start that there with you and ask you, should the Jets draft Jaxson Dart at number 7?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There is no way in hell the Jets should even consider this. Do you want a Zach Wilson 2.0 here? Do you want a Daniel Jones 2.0 in New York again? That's because that's who Jaxson Dart is. You want to mix a little bit of Zach Wilson with a little bit of Daniel Jones. He'll fit right in, I guess, with this mockery of a football program both New York teams have. The Jets look at this as a realistic option. If you want to sell me late in the first round, if you're going to trade back and Jaxson Dart's your pick and you want to sit him, I'm fine with it. I don't agree with it, but I get it. Quarterbacking is quarterbacking. It's the most important position in sports. If you can get one and you feel like they can develop and become something, I understand it. We don't know everything. We don't have all the answers. But Jaxson Dart at 7 is not a good pick. It's not the right pick. It'd be a really, really bad pick. And I think that would officially potentially end this Glenn Muji thing earlier than it even started, honestly. This could be really bad, and we could get into the football side, Rye, but absolutely not.
Football side-wise, I'll start there with Jaxson Dart. Played in SEC, played against the best competition in college football, you could argue. If not, the Big Ten might be the best. But he played in the SEC, and he's played a long time in college football. He started a lot of games here, and he's had some good production in the SEC. 29 touchdowns, 4,279 yards, 6 interceptions, QBR of 86.3 last season at Ole Miss. He played in a system that was formerly in the NFL, and Lane Kiffin, who's worked with quarterbacks before that have succeeded in the NFL. Some haven't, some have. I don't know, man. Jaxson Dart's intriguing. The arm is electric. He's 6'2", 225 pounds. He's worked with the Manning Academy. I don't know, man. Something's intriguing about a guy who's played 4 years in college football, has played in the SEC, has been coached under Lane Kiffin. It's a big jump to the NFL. There's no doubt. And there's always a learning curve for all of these quarterbacks, no matter how good of a prospect they are. But Jaxson Dart is someone interesting to me because I know what you're saying. Zach Wilson 2.0. He played at high school, the same high school with Zach Wilson. But he's bigger than Zach. He's played against better competition than Zach. And I can see how GMs and specifically senior football advisors like Rick Spielman, who was just hired by the Jets, kind of fall in love with a guy like Jaxson Dart.
I'll say this, right? If you look at Jaxson Dart's numbers, right, let's talk a little bit about his numbers. 19 of his 29 touchdowns came against Duke, Arkansas, Georgia Southern, and Furman. So he lit those teams up. I mean, he had a 4-touchdown game against Duke. He had 6 touchdowns against Arkansas. He had 4 touchdowns against Georgia Southern, and then he had 5 touchdowns opening weekend against Furman. I don't want to call him a stat patter, but Lane Kiffin and what they did at Ole Miss, they stat padded just a little bit. Those numbers were very inflated, of which he didn't even throw 30 touchdowns. I mean, he had 29 touchdowns, and I'm not going to split hairs here on 29 versus 32, but like he didn't even have 30 touchdowns, and they were like trying to run the score up multiple weeks. Looking at him on the field, accurate, not insanely accurate, good arm, not an insanely good arm, ability to move okay to good. He can move, but he's not very good at moving. He doesn't really improvise, but he can a little bit. There's nothing he does really well that I can look at and say, oh, that'll work in the NFL. Now, there is a caveat here. There's the Brock Purdy, Jalen Hurts sort of caveat. If you don't do anything really well, but you go into a system that can surround you with some talent and you can learn and you can develop and you can build confidence, you can be good. So if Jaxson Dart goes to the Rams or he goes to the 49ers or he goes to even a team that doesn't even need an established offensive system like Pittsburgh, let's say, and sits for a year or two and learns and builds some confidence, I think he could be a pretty good starter in the NFL. But I think it's going to take him a few years to get there. And to draft a kid 7th, I don't think those should be the expectations of a 7th overall pick. I think 7th overall pick, to what we've discussed in the past, needs to be somebody that you could potentially start in their first year, or at least definitely as your starter come year 2. Well, that's not Jaxson Dart.
Couldn't I make the same argument that you did for Tyrod Taylor? For Cam Ward, sit him behind a Tyrod Taylor for half the season until Tyrod eventually, I don't root for injury, but he's been very injury prone. He gets hurt or ultimately isn't playing well, and you hand the keys over to Jaxson Dart and see what he has the rest of the season. It's a natural progression. And if you believe in the talent and you think that he can work in your system, that you put it so eloquently there, why not? Take a shot. 7, you're not trading up, you're not trading back. You're picking a guy that you believe in at 7, and you're saying to the fans, we're gonna have him sit, we're gonna have him learn the system. He's not gonna start right away, but we believe that this guy can be maybe our Jordan Love and can develop into a starting quarterback for us. I don't know, Frankie.
I think it's going to take him more, though, Rye. I think it's going to take him more than 8 weeks or 10 weeks or 6 weeks. I think it's going to take him a year to 2. I think a minimum, it's going to take him a year and a half to 2 years, which is fine. You give him the Jordan Love treatment. It took Jordan Love 3 years. There's nothing wrong with that. Give him time. If he go Green Bay's maybe a good spot for him too. Let him sit behind Jordan Love. Maybe you can move him in an offseason, or Jordan Love, who's had some injury issues the last couple of years. Maybe he's someone they want as a backup. But I'm saying it doesn't, for me with the Jets, I think drafting him 7th, there's going to be expectations for him to come in and start. They're going to fall in love with this guy, which is another thing I'm really concerned about. The Zach Wilson truthers, they'll be right back out there. The headbands will be out in full force. You'll get people coming, with suntans to training camp because, Zach's always tan and so is Jaxson Dart. I'm kind of jealous how good looking these guys are, but, it is what it is. No, I'm kidding. But, right. That's these guys, though. These Utah kids, they're flashy. Fans love them. They give you all the indication of the, the California dreaming kind of quarterbacks, the Bradys of the world, the Mannings. They look at these guys like they're going to be saviors here, and they never really are. And the other thing about Jaxson Dart, not to completely bash the kid, but I'm not a big fan of his personality. I'm not. And that's another variable with quarterbacks I don't think we speak about enough. How are they, when they step into the locker room, how are they looked at by their teammates, and how do they motivate their teammates? Same reason why I'm not big on Shedeur Sanders. I think he's going to fall into some issues in locker rooms thinking he's the man. It don't stink. I'm everything. I'm driving the Bentley.
From Shedeur? From Jaxson?
Shedeur, 100%. From Jaxson Dart, I do. I think he feels himself a little bit too much. I think he thinks he could kind of do whatever he wants without putting in the grind, which is why I'm a big Cam Ward supporter when it comes to just the personality side. But when I'm looking at these guys, Rye, I also look at personality and vibe. That's a big part. It's almost not as big as, it's not as important as what they do on the field, obviously, but it's a variable and it's very important. And I'm not saying Jaxson Dart's too bad necessarily, but he's got that little bit of that prick arrogance that I think the league's going to humble him a little bit. It did it to Zach Wilson. The league will humble you. We know that about the NFL.
You really think this kid is next Zach Wilson, huh?
I think he's worse than Zach Wilson.
I think that's crazy because Zach Wilson's not even a starting quarterback in the NFL. Well, here's my thing. Zach Wilson played against – you want to talk about bad competition? He played against no one in college, and he played in a COVID-shortened season and put up numbers against really bad teams. Like there's an element here, Frankie. I know what you're saying, diving deep in the numbers. You played in the SEC, and you won a lot of football games. You still have to give him credit for that. The kid beat Georgia, right? He lost by 1 score to Florida. He beat Arkansas. He beat Oklahoma. He lost in overtime to LSU. There's an element here I think you're forgetting. The competition is better in the SEC. So I don't think he's Zach Wilson. I think it's a terrible comparison to Zach Wilson. I think you're thinking that because he's white, he wears the bandana, he's got the long flowing hair, he's got this tan. No, man. Like, the kid played in a much better competition and a better system for a professional quarterback. So I think
he's a Utah quarterback. Those Utah quarterbacks are very similar. Went to the same high school, wore the same number.
How can
probably
you
looked up
label
to Zach.
him? How can you label him?
It's a vibe. It's how they look at the quarterback position. They don't play the position the way I think the position needs to be played. I think they lock on to their first read. They wait for the big play. When everything's going well, sorry to cut you off, but when everything's going well, they're the best thing since sliced bread. They're fireworks. Oh man, oh my, this is the next, Peyton Manning. We can't wait. And then they're having a bad game and they start getting in their feelings a little bit too much. And then they completely crap the bed. That's Jaxson Dart. That's Zach Wilson. That's Sam Darnold. That's Jared Goff. That's the kind of quarterback that I'm telling you this kid's somewhat like. To me, he is that. I'm making an assessment. Could I be wrong? Absolutely. But right. To the SEC point, I see where you're coming from, but there have been a lot of quarterbacks right out of the SEC that we've looked at and said, oh, look who they've played competition. Look at all the Alabama quarterbacks in history. What does it mean?
Just won a Super Bowl.
Yeah, Jalen Hurts. But Alabama notoriously back, I remember 10 years ago, there was a thing, don't draft Alabama quarterbacks because they have all these weapons.
Big difference from now, though, 2025, bud. I would not dismiss the notion. Listen, could they trade back and get a Jaxson Dart? Sure. I'd be in. I'd be in for that. Like, get more picks and take your quarterback. Take your swing. I think we are on the same mindset, Frankie, that if the Jets identify someone a quarterback, take your swing. Take your swing on them because you need to address the quarterback this offseason. Frankie, that's one of our offseason topics.
There's one more thing I want to bring up with Jaxson Dart before we go because I want to get this point out. Jaxson Dart as a receiver, Trey Harris, who is a dog, and he is a baller, and he's going to end up being a pretty high draft pick, come April. So I always wonder with these quarterbacks, and I said this about Shedeur Sanders too, when you have that wide receiver one that bails you out often, like, and I always bring the example of Mike Evans. I remember when Johnny Manziel was in the draft, I told my buddies, I told my good friend Bill, we used to do scouting together before we even had U Stadium, and we would just hang out and just scout guys. I go, Manziel we had him as a 3rd or 4th round pick. We saw Mike Evans bail him out, similarly to what Travis Hunter did for Shedeur Sanders, and somewhat similarly what Trey Harris does for Jaxson Dart. Just throwing that out there. Sometimes those wide receiver ones, which Cam Ward didn't have, really can help elevate who you are in the eyes of scouts and NFL teams. I just want to throw that out there.
That's fine. You could say that, but then I could also say that about a lot of NFL quarterbacks get bailed out by amazing talent at wide receiver. That's how it runs, man. That's how it goes. It's not just the quarterback. You need supporting talent around them, as we saw with Jalen Hurts this year, with one of the best offensive lines, a former Heisman winner at wide receiver, a true stud at number 1 with A.J. Brown, an absolute Hall of Fame running back talent in Saquon Barkley. If you surround these guys with talent, they should be able to perform. So we'll see. Would the Jets draft Jaxson Dart at 7? Maybe. We'll see. Jets fans, let us know what you think. Hit us up in the comments below. Do you think the Jets should trade or even draft Jaxson Dart at number 7 here in this upcoming NFL draft? For Ryan Sampson, that's Frankie Vittorini. Go Jets.